Now I've got an interesting pattern for you today. This thing is the shaggiest fly I have tied in a while. And I found it in John Van Vliet's 1994 book, The Art of Fly Tying. He calls the pattern a gold bead Possie Nymph. And the possy in the name is because really the only material in it is possum fur. I mean, other than a bead and a rib. Now this one specifically calls for Australian possum, but if you don't have that, you can pretty much use any varmint fur for this. Raccoon, squirrel, fur, chinchilla, or American possum. Now they'll be slightly different bugs, but still perfectly fishable flies. I mean, this thing is so buggy, if you mess it up, it's hardly going to be noticeable. Now there is one interesting technique that I'm going to show you, and that's making a fur collar with a dubbing loop. And it's not a hard technique, but it does take a little bit of practice. And it'll help if you have something like this Stonfo dubbing loop clip or this hairline material clamp. You see this thing, when you open it up, the jaws are pretty much parallel all the way down. And then you also need something to spin it with. But again, this is a shaggy fly by design. The one you're about to see, it's far from perfect, but still, it's going in my nymph box. So there's one in the vise, just a gold bead Possie Nymph. Very buggy looking fly, very reminiscent of one of the Dave Hughes all fur wet flies or a flimp. Now I'm tying this on a size 12. It's one extra long barbless nymph hook, and that's 2.8 millimeter tungsten bead. Now the recipe did not say it needed to be weighted, but I think it really does. Even with a tungsten bead, as buggy as this thing is, you'd probably have to fish it with split shot if you didn't weight it, and you might have to anyway. So I'm going to put about 8 wraps on it. Let's see, and just jam it up in there in the bead. And it does say a gray thread. This is a gray 70 denier. Put a little dam behind it, maybe a couple wraps over it. Bring it back. You don't have to go all the way to the back yet. We've got a wire rib we're about to catch in. So copper or brass colored rib and a brassy, copper color and a brassy. That's what I'm trying to say here. And remember, a brassy is the size between a small and a medium. I'm sure you could go with either a small or a medium. It doesn't really give it a lot of flash, but it certainly helps us to shape the body. But before we catch in the body, just take a small tuft of this Australian possum guard hairs. Now that's the underfur right there. We'll pull that out, and what I'm doing here, just kind of pulling what I want and leaving some. I think that's going to be enough right there. And it's not a real long tail, but it's not insignificant. So let's catch this one on right on top. Take a look at it. Okay, I think that's about what I want. A few extra wraps right here. And some of them you could probably just snip that fuzz off. I'm just going to bury it because we've got such a fuzzy body. It's not really going to make a bit of difference. So let's go ahead and put some wax on our thread. And I've been using this low tack wax right here. I just like this better than the harder stuff. I've been using this pretty much all year, and I'm really digging it. And for the body, just take a big clump of this right here. This is some of that possum fur, and I will get a little bit of the brown and a little bit of the white, and then just try to pull out all the guard hairs, and then mix it with your fingers, and you'll get a little clump like this. And I don't spend a lot of time trying to mix it. If you don't get it mixed all that well, you might just end up with a variegated body, which is going to look pretty cool anyway. So let's go ahead and put about a 3-inch noodle on here, and you can leave it pretty thick. And we're not going to take this all the way up to the bead because we've got a pretty fuzzy collar up front. So put this on as tight as you can get it, I guess. And what I like to do, a couple of wraps, and as soon as it's starting to lay some dubbing down, I'll lick my fingers and then just tighten this noodle up a little bit. Now just go ahead and wrap it up to a little bit behind the bead. And I don't worry too much about a taper either, because again, a lot of this is going to be hidden. We've got a little bit of a bulbous look there. I think that's going to be fine. You can already see this thing starting to get really buggy on us. Now just go ahead and counter wrap this wire rib 3 or probably 4 wraps, maybe 5 should get us up there. Okay, there's 5 wraps. Let's go ahead and catch this off. And what I'll do with a big thick wire like this, I'm not going to cut it. I'm just going to grab my thread, pull it down tight, get some tension on it, and then spin it off. And you want to double check, make sure you didn't leave a sharp nub there. If you did, what I like to do is just put a few loose wraps on it right there. Now let's back this thread off from that bead just a little bit. Now let's take that tool I was talking about, this hairline tool. You open it up and the jaws stay pretty much parallel all the way down. And you'll just grab a tuft of hair from the opossum pelt and then snip it off right there. See, this is about maybe just a little bit over an inch, but this is going to be way too much for this fly. So what we'll do here, just, you know, pull some of these out before we get ready to put it in our dubbing loop. But yeah, I'm going to have to thin this out quite a bit here, maybe about that much right there. Now we're going to take a dubbing spinner, maybe one of these kind right here. If you've got one of these, just a weighted cylinder, I guess, and you could put that in your loop, and then when you pull it tight, the loop's going to go together. That one's not hard to use, but I prefer this little hook right here. It's just got a weight on it right there, and this thing spins a lot better. So what I'll do, pull my thread out, probably about, make a little loop, maybe, I don't know, 4 inches or so, maybe 3, might not need to go 4, but let's go ahead and put a wrap behind it too. So I'm just trying to get this little dubbing loop, I don't know, where it's coming off, and, you know, kind of like a little triangle right here. Okay, that's going to be close enough. So what I'll do now, I've got that little triangle, you see that? Just grab this hook and I put it through there, but don't let it go out of your finger just yet. We're going to put this right up in here between these 2 pieces of thread, and then we're just going to let the thread close around them. And now we've got it in there. You see that? But again, this is probably more than we need. So what I'll do now, just spread it out a little bit and maybe even pull some of these out, because this is going to be pretty long. So you can pull these out, manipulate them while you have them in here, and then even trim some of it if you want. So I'm going to just trim a little bit more on this side, because this is going to put way more than I want on here. Okay, I think that's a little bit better. Even this might be more than I want, but we can take some of this out after we've made our dubbing brush, or after we put it on. So I'm just going to drop this down. You see that right there? Hold my bobbin thread out of the way, and now just spin it. Get a nice tight little spin. This probably gone around, I don't know, 30, 40 times even. So now we've got this little dubbing brush right here, and you can go ahead and just rub your fingers on it, get any of the really loose stuff out before we wrap it on. And I like to take some spring-loaded hackle pliers like these right here. So just grab that. Now I can take it out of the dubbing spinner here. And my thread does need to be back up here behind the bead. And now we'll just wrap this on. And it's going to get messy before we're done, so don't worry about that if you think, oh my gosh, this thing is a disaster. Well, it's going to look like one for just a minute here. Okay, 3 or 4 wraps of this. Now we're going to catch this off and then snip this little thread core that we've got with our dubbing brush here. And now, before we really catch it in, you can kind of just pull some of this back and thin it out. But I'm going to go ahead and finish my head, and then I'll show you what I do to clean it up. Or not really clean it up, just to thin it out a little bit. So I've got enough wraps holding that in. Let's go ahead and whip finish it. Now when you have a fur collar like this, you can just really pull a lot of these out with your fingers. or you could step them, you could take your scissors to it too, but I take this brush right here. I'll pull as many of them out as I need with my fingers, and then actually rough it up a little bit. And then we'll go back and trim any of these if we want. Probably not all that necessary. Yeah, it is kind of necessary in this one because I've got a lot more than I want, I think. So I'm just gonna pinch it and then pull some of these out. And then I probably need to take my scissors and thin some of this out. I mean, it's a buggy mess. Probably doesn't need to be this much a buggy mess. So let's go here and just give it a little bit of a haircut here. Okay, I think we're getting there. I probably need to pull just a little bit more out right here. And there we go. I think we got a fishable fly right here. A lot of those are going to be translucent when it's in the water, and really the only thing you're going to see is that body and the tail as a profile. So there you go. Just a really fuzzy, buggy little nymph called the bead head Possie Nymph. Now, I appreciate you watching. Y'all take care, and we'll see you next time.